Hey guys, Woods Farm here. Just back out working on the Kubelwagen. So I'm up to part 40 in the series. Kind of crazy to think I've gotten that far. So last video I did this kind of framework here on the rear end. Now I'm going to start putting in some more kind of pieces of 3/4 inch angle to form sort of a structure that will make the upper portion of the engine bay, because what ends up happening is there's a deck and a firewall and two sides that close the engine in, and then at the very back there's a lid that lifts up and gives you access to do maintenance on the engine. So I need to build the framework and then actually start closing it in. And at some point I have to tackle the floor too. So there's a floor here, which I guess you'd call that the trunk or the storage compartment, and then there's also a floor that kind of forms half of the back seat, and that covers over the transaxle. So that's something I got to start working on as well. So just to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, here's the this is the back firewall of the engine bay, and you can see I've got the 1-inch tubing is forming the outer edge, which the quarter panel gets mounted to. You see there's the fender, and then there's a 5-inch, and I think it might end up being around 6 inches. We'll see. But there's this closed off section. So I'm going to build the framework that makes this edge here, and there's a wall right here which completely closes off the engine bay. Okay, so I just added those kind of angled brackets there. Just wanted to give it a little extra strength. I have a tendency to kind of overbuild things, but I prefer if it was, if the car was a little heavy at the end of the day, but is really good and strong. I think in hindsight I probably could have done all this with 3/4 or 1/2 inch angle as opposed to the tubing, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Okay, so here's where I'm at. I've got the majority of the framework for the rear and the engine compartments complete. And I just started using cardboard to pattern out the sides and rear panel that forms the upper part of the engine compartment. So the next step is to cut those out of steel and get those fitted in place. Now, because this vehicle is wider than a Beetle, this distance here is just a hair over 7 inches on both sides. The measurements I have on a Kubel, 5 inches, so it's a couple inches wider, this panel here, but is what it is. And then this here, this bar that goes across, is where the hinge for the engine lid, hatch, whatever you want to call it, that's where this this part forms the top edge where the hinge will get welded or riveted to. And this distance here is also a little smaller than I would have liked. I think the measurement I had was just under 16 inches, and for the height of the hatch, mine is around 15. I had to make it a little bit smaller just to kind of get this space here a bit wider, because there's these louvers that go in here, and to me it looks like on the actual Kubel this is more like an inch, probably an inch wider at least. So I think that's a product of the bumper positioning being a little bit higher, maybe, I don't know, but I think proportionately we're close. You know, and like I said, at some point you just got to continue and go ahead. I know I'm dealing with a chassis that's slightly larger in some dimensions, so I'm going to have to make compromises. You know, an inch here, a couple inches there, those are things that I have to deal with. So once I get these pieces of steel, I'm probably going to use 18 gauge. I'm going to cut them out, and the back panel here, I'm probably actually going to use the bead roller and put in some beads just to give it some rigidity. And then once all that's done, I'm just going to kind of tie it all together with 3/4 inch angle iron. So there'll be a piece of angle iron that kind of skirts across here, and there'll be angle iron in the corner that ties the two panels together. Okay, so there's the actual panels cut and fit in place. I just need to cut a couple of strips of angle iron for the corners and the top edge, and I'll start tacking it and welding it in place. On a side note, can't wait to get rid of this hot rod exhaust. This isn't a stock thing muffler setup, but I've got some J tubes, and I'm gonna ditch the heater boxes, and I'm gonna go to probably a standard Beetle type exhaust for now, just the cheapest thing I can do. Eventually I'd like to go to dual mufflers, which would be what you would see on like a 1973 thing, or what would be more appropriate for an actual 1940s Kubelwagen. I'm pretty sure they had a dual muffler setup as well. But for the time being, this muffler is functional, so I'm just going to stick with it. I'm probably going to cut off those stupid chrome tailpipes and just replace them with something a little more subtle, like just one pipe on each side, and then I'm just going to paint the muffler black, and I'll probably go with that for this season. Okay, so the engine bay is complete. Everything's welded in place. Pretty happy with the way it turned out. Really, the next step's the floor of the cargo area and the floor of the back seat. But I'm going to do that kind of simultaneously as I'm dealing with the fender, which needs to go in here, because it all ties together, so you sort of have to lay it out and figure it out at the same time. So I think that'll be the next thing I start working on. Okay, so I've just started working on the rear fender, and it's taking quite a while to kind of line everything up and make sure it's right. So far I've gone ahead and I've cut 3 inches off each end, and what that's doing is bringing the fender down. So it's about 18 inches from the center of the hub to each end, and right now it's roughly 23 inches from the center of the hub to the top of the fender. You want the fender a little bit high so there's a bit of room for the tire to travel with the suspension. But the issue that I'm running into is with these fenders, without cutting some off and dropping it down, it's way too high. It looks a little funny with the tire kind of sitting really low down, and also it's too high up here. This space is not quite large enough to accommodate 2 ribs. There needs to be at least 2 ribs that come through, one about 4 or 5 inches down, and then the other one just above the top of the fender. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take 1 more inch off each edge and drop it down just a little bit more. I'm going to do some more measurements and see. The good thing is that right as it stands, I'm 7 inches out from the quarter panel. A measurement I have off of another replica Kubelwagen is 7.5 inches, so I'm close. Now, mind you, that replica is built on a Beetle chassis, which is much narrower. So I'm in the ballpark with the 7 inches, and that's not cutting the fender at all. That's the factory 13 inches. It gets me 7 inches out. I was going to go with that, and then I realized that the front might be an issue, so I started taking a closer look at that. So I have a straight edge coming across here, and that's level with the back, so it's kind of a level line that's going to help me position both fenders and make them even. But what I realized is the nose on a Kubelwagen, it comes in, it tapers. So I need enough. My fenders that I have, that I bought, are only 13 inches. So where the fender stops on the nose, I need to have at least enough distance to get 13 inches out and be 7 inches to match the fender on the back, so that they're even and there's 7 inches sticking out from the quarter panel, and they're flush. The problem is I think I'm short maybe an inch. I've got this. I've made multiple measurements. I have this piece of plywood up, and I've got a straight edge that I've clipped onto here just to measure this distance and kind of see where the fender stops. Do I have enough with the 13 inches of width? If that makes sense. Like I said, I think I'm about 1 inch short, so I need to keep measuring, keep checking, because I don't want to end up shortchanging myself. If I set the fenders at the back at 7 inches and then I don't have enough to do that at the front, it's going to look weird if the front fenders are an inch in. You know, they should be flush. The outside edge of the fenders, it should be a square and straight line. So my only option really is to decrease the distance at the back and bring that in maybe an inch. Again, because the chassis is wider, I think I can get away with it. In fact, the way the tires sit, I feel like I could come in as much as 4 inches and have good coverage over the tire. The problem is if I go in too much, it's going to kind of take away from the look of it being a Kubelwagen. So I have to kind of be very cautious about exactly how much I trim and where to try to get the proportions to match up as closely as possible. Okay guys, hopefully that long discussion about the fenders makes sense. I think it's going to pop a little more when I actually finally settle on the measurements I want to go with and I cut the fenders and kind of put them in place. It will make a lot more sense. Anyways, I'm going to end the video here. I've actually got the whole next week off work, and I'm going to be kind of continuing working and trying to solve this fender problem, and also working on the floor for the back seat and the rear cargo area, and that sort of kind of ties into the rear fenders. So once I get that all sorted out, the next step was going to be some of the body panels. So things are moving along pretty good right now. I'm pretty pleased with the progress. Anyways, if you want to see more videos from Project Kubelwagen, definitely make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.